You're very welcome along to the Matchbook NFL podcast. It's week 3. Hard to believe we're at week 3. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined as always by Judah Forgtgang, and we have a debutant in week 3. We've got him in, especially on the waiver report. It's Doug Kezirian. Doug, welcome along to the Matchbook NFL podcast. You have used Matchbook in the past, and we're delighted to have you on board here. So first of all, give the listeners and viewers, if they haven't heard of you before, a little background, and maybe takeaways from week 2, week 1, whatever way you want to go with it.
Daniel, thanks. Good to be with you. So, yeah, I mean, I grew up very sort of came through the ranks of conventional broadcasting. And as I hit my camera, I did local sports television, presenter, as it's sometimes called in Europe and other places of the world. And my career path took me through Las Vegas and starting in 2005. So I was covering sports betting and particularly the NFL a long, long time ago. Now, I was already familiar with it back then, but that's when I really rolled up the sleeves and got into it. And then I moved throughout my career, went to ESPN. And then within ESPN, I launched the betting show that we had. It was called Daily Wager, which we launched about 5 years ago. And then I hosted that and did a lot of betting content for SportsCenter for total 11 years. I was at ESPN. And then I went on my own. So I'm now at onlyplayers.com, which is where we do a version of content and then some other specific sort of content and services for the sports betting space. So that's where I am now, and living in Las Vegas and participating in all sorts of contests and handicapping and doing all sorts of things in the betting space. Now, as for week 2 reaction, I would say it's another reminder that the NFL loves to brand itself as a league of parity, and we might ultimately have some great records this year, 13-4, things like that. But there doesn't seem to be like far and away these elite teams. And so knowing that every team doesn't play their best every week, it's really important from a betting perspective to read between the lines and how important it is not to just react what you last saw. And it's really situational handicapping plays such a large role.
Yeah, I like that. And under similar enough line, Judah, I guess, but looking at defenses, because we maybe focus on offenses a lot when looking at these handicapping, etc. But obviously defenses, there is a lot of variability from week on week. So important not to overreact.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it. We get into this mindset of the thing we either last saw or even like we have actually a pretty robust sample. Like the Jets defense was really, really good for 2 years, but defenses are kind of fragile and unstable. And I think that was a good reminder of that. The Cowboys have had a terrific defense for a bunch of years, and the Saints just absolutely dominated them. There's no way around that. So I think it's important, kind of as Doug said, to understand the situations, understand the matchups, and not overreact. And kind of the beauty and difficulty in doing what we do is parsing different sample sizes together and saying, this is what's most relevant. This is what is less relevant. And that's kind of how we can make our money and where there's value to be had.
Okay, yeah, I'm quite excited to tackle the week 3 games. We've got 4 games on the slate this week, which I'll get to in just a second. Quick reminder to wherever you're watching or listening to hit that like button and follow or subscribe completely for free. Easiest way to get this podcast when it hits your feed. And to mention to opt into our weekly NFL weekly bet builder offer. That's get a free bet builder each week for Monday Night Football. All you have to do is place a bet builder of £10 or more at minimum odds of even money, and you get a £5 free bet builder each Monday morning for Monday Night Football. Quite exciting and fun way to keep up to date with the NFL throughout the season on Matchbook. Those 4 games, incidentally: Texans at Vikings, Eagles at Saints, Ravens at Cowboys, Lions at Cardinals. It's tough to narrow it down to 4. There's similar-ish games. There seems to be a lot of decent enough games this weekend. So let's get straight into it. We'll start with our opening game, and we're going to cover the Texans at the Vikings and take a look at the betting currently on Matchbook as we record on Wednesday afternoon UK time. It's Texans 174 favorites to the Vikings at 2.24. The handicap sees Vikings get a 2.5 head start, and the total for this one is currently set at 45.5 and very close to a coin flip on that. So Judah, set this game up for us in terms of these two teams, because they both started pretty decently.
Yeah, I think Minnesota has been kind of one of the more surprising teams. And we talked last week that I think the week 1 game against the Giants for the Vikings, I think the narrative was, oh, Giants bad. Let's confirm our priors there. And I think the bigger storyline there was that this is a Vikings defense that is for real. I think if you look at what Brian Flores has been able to do, I mean, Jonathan Greenard is maybe the most underrated defensive player in football. The guy has been an absolute stud at edge for him, and he was last year for Houston as well. I think this is a very, very good defense, and I'm starting to get a little bit of hesitation around Houston. And I think a lot of people are kind of focused on the fact that they run the ball a lot. Their game management's been a little tricky, but I don't think that's kind of the more compelling point. I think CJ Stroud has a little bit of an issue taking sacks. He's holding the ball for a very long time. And when the explosive plays are not coming, right, that's usually a byproduct, the trade-off of if you hold the ball longer, you're going to take more sacks, but also you have the ability to kind of extend plays, as we saw in his highlight reel play, to kind of make a 25-yard throw. But the explosives have not yet shown up. And I don't think this is a particularly intriguing or like great matchup for Houston here. I think this is a legit Minnesota defense that I don't think the market has yet caught up to. And it's one I kind of want to wait and see, because it's also only been 2 weeks for the Vikings. You don't want to completely overreact. And there's certainly a very strong prior on the fact that Houston's going to be a very good offense. And you can kind of start from that assumption. It's a question of are they top 5 or are there some kind of drawbacks to them being closer to just in that good tier. And this is a game I really kind of want to wait and see. I think there's a lot to be learned from each of these teams. And I don't yet have a particularly great feel, but it is certainly one of the most compelling games on the slate, and I'm really excited to see it play out.
Okay, Doug, Judah set that up well for us in terms of it. It's a compelling matchup, both 2-0 teams. CJ Stroud for you, you seem to get him wrong consistently as a better. There may be a few people that might relate to that, but he's such a talent, isn't he? And maybe trying to avoid those sacks is or maybe being unable to do that's probably what he has to pay for, maybe getting that odd super play in there by just hanging onto the ball that bit longer.
Yeah, he's kind of the modern day Brett Favre for me. I can't bet on him and I can't bet against him. Every time I bet on him, it's just a couple plays here and there. And when I bet against him, he turns into Patrick Mahomes. So, but I do think it's a compelling matchup. We're all hesitant about Minnesota, not we, like the masses. I agree. Brian Flores has done a great job defensively. Kevin O'Connell's a play caller. But let's not forget how bad this team was at quarterback last year. They lost 6 of their final 7 games last year because they had Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins as their quarterbacks. And yes, while Dobbs was a fun story at times, and Nick Mullins, don't be misguided by how he played in San Francisco for a little bit, looking like a competent quarterback. That was all Shanahan. He's not a NFL quarterback. But just in general, I feel like these young teams, and they're really both of them are young teams kind of thing in terms of new to the success, is playing with success is really hard in the NFL. Week in and week out, getting everyone's best shot and still winning is really hard to do. I know the Lions struggle with coming off wins. That's what makes the Chiefs so impressive, is they're getting everyone's best shot often in prime time, and they deliver for the most part. So I just don't know if Houston's that mature team yet. They were a chic pick going into the season. I don't see them as a road favorite here, but I get it because their power rating's higher and it's still under 3. It's not like a huge line. But I got a pick 'em league. I'm taking Minnesota, but I can't fire a solid straight bet here.
Okay, yeah, so that's a compelling game for Judah, but no bet. And Doug with a bit of lean towards Minnesota, but no official bet there. But yeah, fascinating game again. Both those teams currently 2-0 in the NFL. Let's move on to Eagles at Saints and take a look at the betting that we currently have on Matchbook.com. Eagles 2.28 here, underdogs to the Saints, who are 173. The point spread currently gives Eagles a 2.5 head start, and the total here is currently set at 49.5. Doug, you mentioned the Vikings finishing last season terribly. I mean, the Eagles sort of went under the radar in terms of how poorly they finished last season. That the roster is incredible, but hasn't quite happened this season either.
Yeah, 10-1 start last year and didn't even win their division. Had to go on the road to Tampa for that wild card game. It's hard. You can't look at this game in just a matchup on paper. You have to look at it through the lens of what happened Monday night. They had the game won, big atmosphere, and I so wish they won that game for a variety of reasons because I had the live bet under. But I would love to be hammering New Orleans with Philly coming in fat and happy, having traveled, sort of an emotionally exhausting start to the season. The travel to Brazil, then the home Monday nighter. And New Orleans is a tough venue, man. And I just don't like their head coach and quarterback. So it's tough for me to, back this team, but I think they might be legit. So I lean to the Saints here because I think it's a tough place to play. They might be pretty good. You know, they're healthy for the most part. And I don't want to back Philly on this short number.
And Judah, you're gonna like that's a lean enough for Doug, and you're gonna ultimately pull the trigger on the Saints. So you're completely in disagreement here.
Yeah, I think this is a classic Saints alt spot. I think kind of the lens I like to use here is if we replayed this game in week 13, what will the line be? And kind of what can we learn about the teams, and where does the risk fall? Is it more likely that the Saints are 6-point favorites if we replayed this? Or is it more likely that the Eagles have kind of moved in a couple spots, or that the line is the same? And I think it's actually, there's some really compelling reasons to think that this game would be 6 points. And I think that you started to see the signs in week 1 of the Saints kind of being this terrific offense. And I think week 2 really just confirmed that by like, aside from just like your typical efficiency metrics, like obviously those are good and they're not going to remain as good as they have been. But what's particularly compelling to me is like what Clint Kubiak is doing to mitigate pressure is I don't even know how to describe it, but I made a graph earlier this week to talk about what I call like disruption, which is effectively when pressure kind of knocks a quarterback off his ability to go through his reads. And I had a filter for disruption, and that was like some extremely low number. But Derek Carr didn't even make it because he's been disrupted so rarely. And I think that when you look at what they've done in like basically any pressure statistic, this is not a good offensive line on paper. And like by most accounts, this was like a bottom 3 unit coming into the year. And I, for one, was extremely hesitant because Derek Carr is the type of quarterback who has drastic splits depending on the situation around him and depending on how good his protection is. Like, you don't do that by accident against Micah Parsons, right? And he was like talking post game about how they're doing all these creative things. And like, I am not well versed enough in kind of the X's and O's to fully grasp that. But what's like pretty clear from the data is that they're going to do a great job mitigating pressure. And Derek Carr has always been a terrific deep ball quarterback. He has those receivers in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, our King Rashid Shaheed finally getting his run. I think this offense is for real. And on the Philly side, like missing AJ Brown is enormous. I think he's probably, other than Tyreek Hill, the most valuable receiver to his team. By most defensive metrics, they're like going to come out as like 16th. The pass rush has not been particularly good. The coverage is fine. I don't think they're really imposing. And this offense is kind of one-dimensional. If they're not running with Saquon Barkley, it's basically just like Jalen Hurts is holding the ball for too long. And if he's scrambling for success, they'll maybe be able to move the ball. I have a lot of hesitation with the Philadelphia offense without AJ Brown. I think this defense is kind of just mid, and I want to be really early to the Saints because by all makings, this is a team that has absolutely elite offensive upside.
Okay, yeah, interesting point. Yeah, if you push this game forward to a few weeks, where would this line be? If the Saints are the real deal, -5.5 the way to play it, according to Judah. So we'll lock that in as an official bet. 2.4 in and around that you will get on Matchbook. Let's go to Ravens at Cowboys. I laugh because it's the Cowboys again. I'm guessing Tom Brady's doing this game. I should have checked that, but it's Ravens 187. He does them every week. The Cowboys 206. The point spread sees the Cowboys get a 1.5 head start. The same price of Ravens -1.5, and the total is 48.5. So yeah, Judah, before maybe you get into your total bet here, like this is a massive game for both teams. I know the Cowboys are probably the story, but Ravens 0-2, they need a win here as well.
Yeah, the Ravens very desperately need a win, especially starting 0-2 is one thing. Losing to the Raiders as 8.5 point favorites is particularly
Not
bad.
great.
Not great. I think the point here is that there's a lot of kind of remnants of what these teams have been in the past. And I was selling Baltimore last week. I talked about, I think this is a team that has offensive line troubles. The defense is obviously not the same. And losing Mike McDonald, their defensive coordinator from last year, matters a lot. But I think we can kind of say that about the Cowboys too. They really lack secondary weapons outside of CeeDee Lamb. I mean, Brandon Cooks is just really getting up there in age. They're throwing balls to Kevontae Turpin. He's kind of a special teams guy. Jalen Tolbert has really struggled. I think these are both offenses that are kind of being given a little bit too much credit for what they've done in the past. And I think these are teams that are going, especially the Ravens side, is going to like get back to the ground game, run the ball a whole bunch. And I see this as a slow-paced game, one that Neither team is going to take massive explosives. And frankly, I mean, Baltimore's been really bad defending the explosive play. I'm not sure that Dallas is going to be able to take advantage. A lot of their damage has come versus man coverage teams. Baltimore has not played a lot of man coverage. I think this is a game that just plays slow. A lot of teams running the ball, and the total is just a little bit too high right now.
Okay, so currently set at 48.5. Judah leading, strong lean there by the sounds of things at under at 193. That's 48.5. Doug, I mean, the Cowboys conceded 92 points their last two games at home. It's just insane. So maybe some of that might come into their thinking in terms of, as Judah touched on, the under perhaps.
Yeah, I do like the under the more I heard Judah talk about that, because I'm kind of in a position where I want to fade both teams. I wonder if both of them are just getting by on last year's sort of reputation and really Baltimore's track record the last handful of years. But the offensive line we saw in opening night against Kansas City was not good. They had some serious issues. And yes, they should have covered, if not for a toe by Likely, because they would have gone for two. So it would have been a cover either way. But they were also very fortunate to be in that position with about 6 minutes to go. So depending on how you look at that, woulda, coulda, shoulda, was it as even that close to begin with? And then they were up 10 points with the Raiders at home. I just worry that their O-line has issues. Not that Dallas's defense is a bunch of world beaters, but the Cowboys have their own issues. So I lean Baltimore in this game. You mentioned the desperation of 0-2, and I wonder if the Cowboys have just sort of missed. I wonder if both teams have missed their window. So if they're on the decline, so to speak, from what we've seen the last couple years. And I would definitely lean under and definitely lean to Baltimore, but I don't know if I'm ready to fire, because my eyes show me that this team has some issues offensively on the O-line.
Yeah, very much both teams with questions to answer in this game. So maybe, yeah, like you said, the under is possibly the way to go here. That under is currently 48.5, as we touched on there. But yeah, another fascinating game. And we'll move on to a game at the same time. The Lions at the Cardinals. Maybe it didn't look like a fascinating game a couple of weeks ago, but here we are. The Lions money line is 171. The Cardinals 228 underdogs, but they are getting a 2.5 head start at above even money, and 52.0 is the total. Doug, you're expecting a strong performance from Detroit here.
So the Lions have won and covered 8 straight games off a outright loss going back over the last year and a half. So I talked about it earlier with the Texans. These young teams that have a bunch of talent, they're much better to back off a loss. They get that little midweek reminder or midseason reminder, and then they come off of it like very buttoned up and focused at practice. Some of that's a little bit of a narrative, or maybe all of it, but it makes sense to me with a team has a roster that talented to be just more polished and buttoned up off a loss. We see that all the time in sports. But I do worry that Goff is either it's the film and things like that. He hasn't looked right the first 2 weeks. I mean, last week, the market steamed up on their over-under with Tampa from 48-ish to 51-ish, and it didn't even come close, landed 36. So, and then the week one, the opener with the Rams, a lot of that was LA's injuries and going quick throws and matriculating up the field. But Goff looked pretty subpar in that game too. So I'm a little concerned. But with that being said, Arizona can pop at home, and they should be flying all over, so to speak. So I'm on the over here. I'm going to take a little bit of a leap of faith that Goff can get this offense going, because the Cardinals want to play in a track meet, and they have a little bit of an explosive offense as well. And that Lions secondary, what do they have? 3 defensive pass interferences in the end zone on opening night, picking on the Alabama young guy, the corner. So I'll go over here.
Okay, yeah, the over 52.0 is currently 1.9. And Judy, you're complete opposite end. I mean, I know Doug was first up there, but I did sort of find myself agreeing with a lot of what he said in terms of both potential explosive offenses here, particularly Arizona.
Yeah. Well, I guess I got a tough task now of trying to persuade you on the other side. I think it's a very similar handicap to Baltimore Dallas. These are two teams that want to run the ball. I mean, through 2 weeks, Arizona is 17th in if you adjust for situation, their pass rate, and Detroit is 19th. And especially if Detroit is going to be the one controlling this game, I think they're going to lean on the ground game. They're going to have this sort of ground and pound approach. I am certainly leading the charge, so to speak, of the Arizona offense. There is one of my favorite teams coming into the offseason, but they're also not going to repeat the success they had last week. They might be really good, but that was an outlier performance against like a really dreadful Rams defense. I think that, and the total kind of steamed as a result of that, looking from kind of the look aheads. These are two teams that want to run the ball. And like 53.5 is a massive, massive number. And you really need explosive offenses to do that. Now, can that happen? Of course. But I think it's going to require some of these outlier plays. It's not like a Chiefs-Bengals game where, let's say, like 2019 Chiefs-Bengals, where both teams are passing the ball 8% over expected and looking downfield. It's a different NFL. And these are teams that are going to run the ball. And certainly from the Detroit side, Arizona faces the run at like 10% above expectation. They're not very good at stopping it. I think this is just, there are going to be too many runs for points to kind of stack up. And certainly looking from a fundamentals perspective, 53.5 is just too high for what these teams are trying to do.
Yeah, Doug, maybe final word to you on that. I mean, even the different NFL sort of element of it. I mean, we've seen, it's been well talked about and documented, the decrease in passing touchdowns versus even 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, it started last year. Remember, we had all those unders, like 60 whatever percent through 5, 6, 7 weeks. A lot of it was red zone offense, and there was a lot of prevent, pseudo prevent to the layman, but like a lot of shell defenses where everything was underneath, and teams weren't practicing a lot of the run offense. So I think there's a lot to process, and what Judah's saying is giving me a lot of pause. I do agree the Lions will try to run the ball. I guess it's a little bit of, I like both offenses at their best, just don't know if I'm going to get it. And then the defenses are a little bit leaky, if you will. But I mean, look, Arizona's one of my favorite plays last week, but it was a lot because like Rams I knew wouldn't be ready to play. Gas tank was empty off the Sunday nighter. So I don't want to put too much stock in last week. So that's a concern I have betting the over. But I mean, they got into a track meet with the Buffalo too in the opener. And I don't know what we're going to get with Detroit. We always want to live in a world of Pleasantville where things are incremental, and Detroit made a big step, and they've made a step each the last few years. But maybe this team is off the rails a little bit and goes 9-8. Who knows, right? Every team doesn't just gradually improve. We know that first of all, we know every year since 2000, except for 1 year, there's been a team with a win total of at least 10.5 that's missed the playoffs. Now, whether that's Baltimore or another team, we shall see. But there's a lot of teams that made the playoffs 1 year, don't make it the next. We know about worst to first. So we can't assume last year that everything's going to progress into the following season. So maybe this offense, I mean, look, St. Brown hasn't been the same. Goff hasn't been the same. Maybe maybe the headline come Monday is what's wrong with the Lions offense too. So I certainly understand the underside of things.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably lean. It'll be ultimately a no, but I guess for the podcast in general. But Judah, you were agreeing with a lot of that, and I guess like Kyler Murray's obviously looks like he's back to his best, to be fair, for the Cardinals. But the way the NFL has sort of evolved over the last couple of years suggests that time is probably running out a little bit quicker for the total of this height maybe to be ultimately passed over.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. It's not to say the ceiling isn't there. Obviously, that's there. It's just a matter of like, how is this game most likely to be played, right? We're not betting on alts, we're betting on the kind of median outcome here. And I think it's just a much slower game than what we would need to see for a 53-point total.
Okay, yeah, so we'll lean under there, but no about ultimately insights.matchbook.com. There'll be a full recap of all the guys' picks. A lot of the marquee games were very much 50-50 calls in terms of the guys' selections, but there is a lot to come in the any other bets section here. So we'll start with you, Doug. I mean, plenty to get through here. I mean, let's start with the Colts. They couldn't get it done against the Packers. Very disappointing performance, I would say, overall.
Right, but just I was I swear I should have segments called Old Doug. Old Doug would have been laying it last week, just betting against Malik Willis, given how bad he's looked at times. But I think that was sort of just one of those situations where the Packers were at home. They rally around it. Malik Willis's air travel yards on the passes were just so short. And it was one of those grinding games. Now, I think we're going to see the Colts come back to life here. At home against a Bears team that O-line just looked dreadful. They really should have been blown out. I think the offense had like 90 yards up until that last drive of prevent defenses where they got some points, but just penalties. The Texans had over 100 yards in penalties, huge bomb that was dropped because it lost in the lights. You also had essentially a 50-yard holding call on a punt because it was a 40-yard return, and It was called back. Just numerous examples of how the Bears should have been blown out. And then we all know what happened week 1. They got lucky with Chicago only getting 93 yards passing from Caleb Williams. So I think this is finally they're going to get what's coming to them with the Colts, who've played well at times, especially week 1. They've just played the wrong opponent for them. I think this is a get right spot for Indy. I'm kind of surprised this line is not like 3. I thought the line would be a solid 3 here.
Okay, so a bit of juice according to Doug on the Colts, laying 1 point against the Bears. Chargers at Steelers, both these teams 2-0. I mean, Mike Tomlin's just going to get another winning season, isn't he? For I think the 18th straight season.
He might win the
insane.
division.
Exactly. And then you have the Chargers who are both looking good, but I guess these are both teams, particularly the Steelers, are built on a proper defense here. So I mean, how low can you go with the total for the unders? But sometimes it's not low enough though.
Right. And I swear I need to look this up, but I have a buddy who told me like 10 years ago, he's like, if you take the lowest NFL total, just go under, and the highest one highest each week, you'll be fine. It is the lowest total on the board at 35.5. And it's definitely a bet on the Steelers defense. That's for sure. But also kind of a bet on their type of offense. And Tomlin is more than happy punting around midfield, leaning to that defense. I really think the last couple of years where TJ Watt has missed extended time, it's one of those things where I throw out sort of the results when like a quarterback's hurt. Like, I don't care. He is such a giant impact. He applies pressure without blitzing that feels like a blitz. So it's almost like they got an extra man in the secondary. So if you look at some of the performances of the defense and what they do statistically when he's out over the last couple of years, he really is that much of a game wrecker. So this Chargers defense, I mean, look, great. They played well against the Panthers last week. We all know what the deal was there. They switched quarterbacks already. And week 1, the Raiders shot themselves in the foot. You had the Antonio Pierce punt. I mean, it was okay, but I really think the Steelers just want to grind clock and win these low-scoring games. So I kind of lean to the Steelers here. But, I mean, it's back-to-back early games for the Chargers, travel on the other side of the U.S. Like, I just don't love the spot, and they're going to be all fat and happy 2-0. So I think it's got like 20-10 written all over it. The Steelers defense is for real. And Tomlin, particularly in the first half, loves these rock fight games.
Okay, and one final one for you, and then I'll bring Jude in on his any other bet. The two teams that the Chargers have beaten, the Raiders against the Panthers. I mean, you mentioned the Panthers quarterback change. I mean, it's a lot more than the quarterback, although they weren't giving him protection. But the two things can be true where maybe he just quite hasn't lived up to that potential over the last just season and a bit at Carolina.
Yeah, you nailed it. Two things can be true here, right? They're more than a quarterback change away from being competent. The roster build is terrible. And look, I've been doing a victory lap because I was telling everyone Bryce Young should not have been drafted number 1. He's too small, all that stuff. But Andy Dalton he's not playoff version of Andy Dalton. He hasn't been good for years. And I understand the line move a little bit because 7's a big number. And the Raiders aren't world beaters, but they can play well at home. They're tough. They have a big crowd. That defense can get after them. I think they'll be ready to rock. It's their home opener. And I had a little concern for a flat spot coming off the big win, but this is a team that will have stretches of really good play. And I think we're going to get a good version of them this weekend. So I just think the Panthers got a lot of work to do. And I don't think the quarterback change like circles the wagon. They're on the road. I think they're a mess across the board. So I'll lay that number with the Raiders here.
Okay, that's -5.5 at 196 on Matchbook. Judah, one of your any other bets is the Titans -3 off to. I mean, it probably should have been at least a 1-1 start for but look, ultimately they are 0-2 here. How do you think this is a bounce back spot for them here?
Yeah, I think this is like almost the play on the Packers of like Malik Willis is bad. I don't really care what happened last week. Like, I don't think there's anything getting around that. And like the secret, so to speak, is out. Like, they're going to try and run the ball. I mean, I don't know what Indianapolis was game planning by like not thinking to just load the box and do everything you can to sell out to stop the run. But regardless, I think it's kind of a similar situation to the Rams that like they came out in week 1 with just like an extremely quick passing attack. They were getting the ball out in 2 seconds most of the time. And then like teams adjust because you can kind of game plan around that and bring your safeties down. I think we see a very similar story here of like, first off, I think that Tennessee has done a much better job stopping the run than Indianapolis. So even if they don't game plan for this and you never want to kind of coach your bets, I do think that the Packers will have a little bit of a tougher time running the ball. But also, I do think like they are going to game plan and force Malik Willis to throw, and I think that's just a disaster waiting to happen. Not to mention, you're not going to get a ridiculous Will Levis red zone turnover every week, as much as those highlight reel plays kind of stick out. They're fluky.
We hope.
These things are unlikely to repeat itself week after week. And the Titans team has done a fine job moving the ball. And this is a pretty ferocious pass rush, it seems, which certainly, if Malik Willis is forced into any kind of standard dropbacks, that's a real problem considering his propensity to take sacks. Also, just make one more brief point of like, you can't really learn that much about a game script like the Colts and Packers game last week. It was so is such an outlier performance in how much Green Bay wanted to run the ball, and kind of, as you mentioned, just like a lot of the flukiness that kind of led to that. I just don't think that is repeatable in any such way, and it's almost like we're just back in the shoes of week 2 of like Malik Willis, and I posted this meme of like the normal curve of like Malik Willis bad, Malik Willis bad, and like I'm probably going to go back to my left-hand side here of Malik Willis bad, and I'm going to take the Titans.
Okay, we won't spoil Doug's long shot there, but you could see viewers anyway, a little bit of nodding in agreement. Money line parlay or double here on the Seahawks and the Bengals. So I mean, we all watched the Bengals Chiefs. I mean, unlucky not to get over the line there. They seem to bounce back from the week 1.
They have to. They have no margin for error. And Zach Taylor, I think, is 1-11 now in weeks 1 and 2 in his head coaching career. So this is when they start to turn things around. And Washington has doing some things right on offense. Like I think Jaden Daniels with his mobility and everything is going to probably have a little bit smoother sailing maybe than Caleb Williams because he's got more weapons and things along those lines. But this defense is terrible. Even the Giants could move the ball. If they had a kicker, they would have won the game. So I think Cincinnati, in terms of getting the win, I think is a safe bet per se. And, just from a recreational and public approach, there are, no one wants to lay that kind of money line. But for me, the Seahawks are another situation. So Skylar Thompson is really not a backup NFL quarterback. He's very weak. And I know there's weapons, and I know he's going to look better than he looked in the last game because he's had a full week of practice, as I always say for any backup, but he's not going to look much better. He's been awful in every game he's played. And this is a tough place to play for Miami to go handle this in Seattle. I think Seattle's going to be buttoned up and take care of their business. I don't want to lay the 4.5 per se. So I'm confident. I like the Seahawks money line at -220 or so. So throwing them together gives me a fun little bet there. But I legitimately would be stunned if Miami went into Seattle and won, and same for Washington into Cincinnati.
Yeah, so if you're not comfortable laying the points on either of those games, maybe double them up in a money line double, as Doug said, around 1.8 on Matchbook if you're backing with us. And the team that beat Miami last week were the Bills. Josh Allen, I mean, they're obviously priced like that in the Super Bowl. What I'm about to say, well, yeah, they do look legit Super Bowl contenders, although they always do, and then somehow end up throwing it away in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Monday night game at Orchard Park with Bills Mafia and everything. And Josh Allen is the difference maker, right? He's been indestructible. The Bills have their issues for sure, but I don't think the Jaguars are the team that's going to exploit it. They've been really shaky. You have Peterson on the hot seat. It seems like it's a organization internally that's hanging on by a thread. Last week they just looked inept. I think Trevor Lawrence did as well, and by his standards, by our standards of him. And I think that feels like a little bit short of a number. I would have made the line 6. And as much as the Jaguars' upside is there, they're just so unreliable. So from a consistency standpoint, and, Judah talked about earlier, if these guys faced each other later in the season, maybe I won't do week 13 because of the weather would be disruptive to Jacksonville. So like week 7, I think this line would be 6 or so.
Okay, so a bit of value perhaps on backing the Bills now -5 versus the Jaguars. And finally, the one Thursday night football to throw in there, you like a Russian prop on Stevenson here. So, I mean, currently you can get the lines around 66.5 as you've quoted. With Matchbook, you can sort of go from 60 to 70 depending on what price you want to back. But if, for example, you did go 70 plus rushing at yards on Matchbook, you'd be getting even money there.
Yeah, I mean, look, we know the game script, so to speak, the way Patriots want to play this game. They want to run the ball some more. Maybe Brissett makes a couple plays on third down and turn it over to their defense. And even though they lost last week as opposed to week 1, they had him right in the game. So I think they're going to want to get into this. Stevenson giving him the ball, and he's flown over his prop. I think he had it at halftime in week 1. So early in the year, in a situation like that, I don't see them sort of derailing. And Judah mentioned it. This Jets defense was great for a couple years, but I mean, we saw backup running back in San Francisco carve them up. Now, a lot of that's the O-line, but I'm not sold on this Jets defense per se. And I think Stevenson is just going to get his yards. It may take a bunch of carries, but I'm okay with that. I think he'll get his yards. And I think it's a game script that New England wants to stick to, because I think it's their formula.
Okay, and that is Thursday Night Football. Over to long shots time, and Judah. Yeah, you tried the Giants money line last week. I mean, very unlucky considering to score 3 touchdowns and not win the game. But at the Browns this week, they're around 9-4 or 3.25. So why is this the underdog of the week for you?
Yeah, I think that another kind of strange game script, like with the Giants and the Commanders, where Washington was just controlling the ball. I think Daniel Jones threw like 5 or 6 passes in the first half. I don't think the Browns are going to be able to repeat that success. And this is a massive, massive spread for a team that has like shown really zero ability on offense. And I'm not sure how long we're going to give Deshaun Watson leash, unless like he actually shows. I mean, has he had any games since coming to the Browns that have indicated that he's closer to the Texans form than what he is now? I don't think so. I think this is a really bad offense. And the defense, kind of to our earlier point about the fragility of defenses year over year, that's like kind of struggled a little bit. I mean, Dallas like completely took off the gas in the second half of their week 1 game. The Jaguars again were killed by some drops, and they still moved the ball relatively efficiently. There were some turnovers and whatnot. This is just far too many points, I think. And if you look at the Giants offense, a lot of the underlying numbers make it seem like this is a team that is a lot closer to the 2022 version than the 2023 version. And this is, they're generating some separation. The offensive line has not been a disaster for Daniel Jones. I don't think the Browns are as bad a matchup as one would think, because there's a lot of this 2023 prior baked in. Not that much needs to go right, I think, especially in kind of a slow game where the Giants can put up points, and the Browns frankly just don't have the offense to really expose the Giants where they're weakest in the secondary. And I think this is a defensive line that can cause the Browns a lot of problems. That offensive line has regressed a bunch. Their kind of pressure rate, this pressure disruption rate, that is plays where pressure kind of disrupts the quarterback from his ability to go through his rhythm. They're at the bottom of the league in that category against a Giants defensive front that's towards the top. I think that poses kind of a problem for the Browns. And at this price, I'm just going to back the Giants. As ugly as it seems, I think this is just too mispriced.
Okay, yeah, it does seem quite a big gap, and that money line price of 3.25 will lock in. Doug, you're going the odd line. You're doing a bit of Judah, but you're exaggerating it here to try and get as much value for money as possible. And there is a scenario, I guess, similar to build on what Judah said a few minutes ago about the Titans, and more so maybe an anti-Packers case here, that the Titans could perhaps win this by margin.
Yeah, I was trying to go long shot, right? So why stop at like, just a -5.5 or 9.5?
Keep pressing up.
I do think this is a spot where Tennessee's kind of circles the wagons and gets right. Now, I don't think much of Will Levis and this team. I was under their 6.5 win total, but this is not the game where Green Bay is going to come in. They had a nice win last week at home and threw off some high school sort of playbook at them, and it worked and all that stuff. But that Mickey Mouse approach is not going to work in this game. I think if you take out some of the crazy plays where the head coach of the Titans is yelling at his quarterback, "What the F are you doing?" The Titans are a lot better than what we've seen in terms of the final result. So I think this is where they get it all together and we see a lopsided outcome. Malik Willis really is terrible. When he played for Tennessee, ironically, against the Chiefs a few years ago, I argued that maybe they won the coin toss. They should have kicked off, just because, you get the ball back and all you need is a field goal to win. And then you also have field position. Like, he couldn't get first downs. Like, he's not a competent quarterback. And Judah talked about with the safeties playing back and stuff. At some point, you just have to, play at the front and just force them to throw over you. It's really a limited offense. So I think if the Titans get rolling a little bit on offense, because they have some weapons at the wide receiver position, then this game could get out of hand.
Okay, yeah, so let's lock in a fun one there. The Titans minus 13.5 on the alternative point spread. Around 5.3, you're getting rewarded with a bigger price. And let's move on to best bet time. And Judah, what do you make of the Chiefs, I guess, before we talk about this matchup? And after 2 weeks, I mean, they sort of got away with it, I sense, against the Bengals. But look, they're still up to a solid enough start this season.
Yeah, the thing that's kind of surprising to me is that they are, after like 6 straight years of kind of passing like 10% over expected, meaning adjusting for situation, they were actually negative through 2 weeks. And I think they had kind of some success with Isaiah Pacheco. And that's great and all, but when you have Patrick Mahomes as quarterback, you probably want to give him the ball. And I don't want to coach my bets and say this is the type of thing that I think will happen. But if you just look at, we have such a huge sample of this team really relying on Mahomes. I think we go a little bit closer to that version of the Chiefs, and I am by no means worried about this offense, especially against the Atlanta team that like has been a disaster trying to generate pressure. 3.5. I mean, come on. I don't know what we're doing here. I guess I should have put this in my any other bets section. But the Chiefs are far too good. We have far too large a sample of this team being great on offense, and there's absolutely nothing that Atlanta can kind of throw at them that's going to dissuade me from this Chiefs team. I'm going to take them at 5.5 here on the alt line. I mean, what's this line if the Falcons don't win? I don't see this happening, and I don't think there's any data to suggest that this line should be as short as it is.
Okay, Judah almost angry at the thoughts of Chiefs having to lay only 3.5, so he's pushed it up to minus 5.5 at a bigger price, 2.3. And final word to you, Doug. Team you mentioned here earlier, the Seahawks got it done last week against the Dolphins, and I'm guessing from what you said earlier, it is probably an anti-Miami quarterback or backup quarterback here.
Yeah, I like aspects of Miami. But it's a giant drop off at quarterback. Not that Tua is all world, but Skylar Thompson is pretty incompetent. He's not Malik Willis quite territory, but he's close. And I think this team will have a lot of issues. And it's not like defensively they're that great. So I think, the new coach with Mike McDonald will have the Seattle team rocking. I think it's a tough venue. And I just don't see Miami having the internal strength to kind of hang around for 4 quarters and to keep this inside the number. I think this gets away from them at some point.
Okay, that's Seahawks minus 4.5 is the current line, and that is at 1.93. We're done. My thanks to Judah and Doug. More agreement than I thought throughout the podcast. A lot of nodding at each other's selections. So hopefully we offset that. But Doug, enjoyed week one. Enjoyed your first week making your debut here on Matchbook.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun. And, sometimes the slate of games lends itself to, being on opposite sides of games and things along those. It's just one of those leagues where, I always joke that the scar tissue helps. You've been you've been doing the NFL long enough. There's going to be no absolutes because of the league of parity and because these games come down. I mean, just look at, Judah mentioned, imagine with the Falcons, literally, if they just run the ball a couple of times, they'd be in the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, who knows, the game stays way under the side, if they kick the field goal or not. Just a crazy ending at the end of these games. And, the officials sometimes give help a little bit that just kind of makes you scratch your head. And I'm not talking about the pass interference for the Chiefs. It's one of these games where you wonder why you bet on this stuff sometimes, because the mind-boggling coaching decisions and things along those lines. But you got to be careful and very measured for some of your bigger plays, because I always tell myself, no matter what I'm thinking, there's somebody who's really sharp who likes the other side. So just be careful.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. And Judah, it's not too far away from what you've been saying a couple of weeks, particularly early on in the season. It's not to overreact, or maybe sometimes overreact if it hasn't overreacted enough, if that makes sense. There's a lot of variables,
That's right. It's kind of diving into what's noisy, what's not, what's compelling, and kind of there's always someone who disagrees with you. And kind of that should help sharpen the thinking, if anything, keeping that in the back of your mind. But that's the beauty of handicapping this game and watching it, is that things are kind of fluky and variant and random, but there's also some pattern to it that you can try and decipher. It's what makes this such a compelling sport to watch and such a compelling sport to bet and handicap.
Absolutely. And a pleasure listening to the two of you guys over the last 45 minutes or so. Insights.matchbook.com, because there was a lot of bets thrown at you there. If you want a full recap of bets, that'll be available from Thursday morning, or just search Matchbook Insights and you should find it. And final reminder to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're watching or listening. Until then, we'll chat to you next Wednesday. Enjoy the weekend NFL for week 3. Bye-bye.